In 2015, this chilling emergency call marked the start of one of South Africa's most bizarre cases.
Can you please just send an ambulance or more than one ambulance?
What are the injuries?
Head injuries.
Are there any suspects on scene?
No, they ran away.
The Van Breda family lived in a luxury, high-security estate where nothing like this had ever happened. Yet that night, a brutal attack left some of them almost unrecognizable from the savage blows to their heads. So how could this happen? And more importantly, why?
If I thought that I had the capacity to physically help them at that point, I would have done so, but I didn't.
You never thought of the possibility of consoling them in their death, in their dying death? Make them comfortable.
Yeah, I suppose.
The Van Bredas were, by all outward appearances, living the dream. Martin van Breda was the managing director of Engel & Volkers, a prestigious real estate firm. He was an exceptional businessman, driven, respected, and wealthy. His wife, Teresa, was devoted to their children and known in their community as warm and generous. Together, they had 3 kids, 22-year-old Rudy, 20-year-old Henri, and 16-year-old Marley. They lived in the De Zal's golf estate near Stellenbosch, one of South Africa's most exclusive residential communities. Picture-rolling vineyards, manicured golf courses, and multi-million-dollar homes tucked behind electric fencing and 24-hour armed security patrols. This wasn't just a safe neighborhood, it was a fortress. The family had moved back to South Africa from Australia in January 2014, where the children had attended school in Melbourne. Henri had been studying physics at Melbourne University before taking a gap year. Rudy was kind, protective, and well-loved. Marley was bright, athletic, and full of life. To neighbors, they seemed like the kind of family you'd see in a holiday card, close-knit, happy, and thriving. But if that were all true, we wouldn't be covering this case today. As it turns out, Henri had developed an addiction to tic, a form of methamphetamine that's particularly potent and destructive. His parents had discovered the problem and sent him to an expensive rehabilitation facility. They also made a difficult decision. They cut off his allowance until he could prove he was clean. For a young man used to financial freedom, that must have felt like a prison sentence of its own. Still, on the night of January 26, 2015, everything seemed normal. The family gathered to watch Star Wars together. They had dinner, a little wine. According to Henri's own later testimony, it was a lovely family occasion. Nobody could have known that within hours, 3 of them would be dead.
What is your emergency?
I need an ambulance. Lots of.
You need an ambulance?
Yes, please.
What's your name, sir?
Henri van Breda. Can you please just send an ambulance or more than one ambulance to De Zal's Wineland in Stellenbosch?
And you, the patient?
No, my family is. Someone attacked my family.
Hey?
Someone has attacked my family in my house.
Okay, so you need the police or the ambulance.
And an ambulance, please. Yes.
Now, who is injured?
I think everyone.
Everyone in your house?
Everyone, 4 people, yes.
What are the injuries?
Head injuries.
Are they conscious?
I don't think so. My sister's moving, but that's it.
Suspects still on scene there, sir?
Sorry?
Are there any suspects on scene?
No, they ran away.
With what were they attacked?
An axe. I think I blacked out and I've just woken up.
When police arrived at the Van Breda home just after 7:30 that morning, what they found was beyond comprehension. A paramedic who responded to the scene would later say it was the worst thing he had witnessed in his 39-year career. Blood was flowing down the stairs like a waterfall. The walls were splattered. The air was thick with the metallic smell of it.
De Zal's a golf estate in the Cape Winelands district, the home of upmarket residences and plush golf courses. But on Tuesday morning, it was the scene of a bloodbath. Businessman Martin van Breda, his wife Teresa, and son Rudy found dead. It's believed they were bludgeoned with an axe. Police won't divulge the whereabouts of the van Breda's 20-year-old son Henri was present at the time of the attack. Their 16-year-old daughter Marley is currently fighting for her life after being transferred to the Vergelegen Mediclinic in Somerset West. The teen is not being allowed any visitors at this stage. Residents of the De Zalzo Golf Estate are still shocked at the gruesome murders on this generally quiet premises. Security at the multi-million rand estate is extremely tight, raising questions around whether this could have been an inside job. But police won't be drawn, saying the murders are currently being investigated and no arrests have yet been made.
Martin van Breda, the father, was dead. He had been struck at least 5 times in the head with an axe and once across the neck. His back bore deep wounds, injuries that forensic experts would later say suggested he had used his own body to shield his son Rudy. But it hadn't been enough. Rudy was dead too, hacked at least 4 times in the head. Teresa, the mother, had been struck at least 3 times. She died in her bedroom near the bathroom. The door had been forced open and blood evidence was scattered throughout the room and hallway. Marley, the 16-year-old daughter, had been struck at least 4 times in the head. Her jugular artery had been cut. She was barely alive, unconscious, and bleeding out. She was rushed to intensive care, where doctors fought to save her life. She would survive, but the injury she sustained that night would leave her with retrograde amnesia. She has no memory of the attack, no memory of who did this to her family, no memory of the final moments she spent with her parents and brother. And then there was Henri. He was found standing in the driveway wearing sweatshorts and white socks that were absolutely drenched in blood, the blood of his parents and brother. He had a few cuts on his body, but they were superficial. Lacerations. Nothing life-threatening. Nothing that required more than basic first aid. The weapons, an axe and a knife, were found inside the house. The axe had been stored on a shelf in the pantry. The knife came from the kitchen. Both belonged to the family, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if whoever killed the Van Breda family had walked through the front door without breaking in at all. Henri's story was simple. He told police that during the early morning hours of January 27th, he was in the bathroom when he heard strange banging noises coming from somewhere in the house. He shouted for help and his father came running. Henri said he saw a black intruder wearing gloves, dark clothes, and a balaclava, a ski mask. The intruder attacked his father. Henri tried to fight back, but he was overpowered. He wrestled with the attacker, suffered minor injuries, and then, he said, he lost consciousness. When he woke up, everyone was hurt. He was disoriented. He didn't know what to do. He searched for emergency numbers. He tried calling his girlfriend. Eventually, he called for help. That was his story, and at first, in a country with a relatively high crime rate, it didn't seem entirely implausible. Home invasions do happen in South Africa, violent ones. But then investigators started looking closer. The call to Henri's girlfriend, Bianca, came in at 4:24 in the morning. She didn't answer. Phone records showed that he then searched online for local emergency numbers. But South Africa's emergency system can be confusing. There are multiple numbers depending on the service you need. Still, Henri's own girlfriend would later testify that all the emergency numbers were taped to the fridge in the Van Breda home. Everyone in the family knew where they were. So why did it take him nearly 3 hours to make the call? Henri said he had collapsed after the attack, that he was unconscious for a long time, but when he finally did call emergency services at 7:12, his voice on the recording was relatively calm, measured. Not the frantic, panicked tone you might expect from someone who had just woken up to find his entire family slaughtered. And then there was the question of his injuries. Henri had a few cuts, small lacerations on his arms and torso, but they were shallow, superficial. When investigators examined them, they began to suspect these wounds had been self-inflicted. They were too controlled, too precise, not the kind of injuries you'd expect from a violent struggle with an axe-wielding intruder. Meanwhile, forensic experts were analyzing the bodies. What they found was chilling. All of the victims had been struck with the same amount of force. The blows came from one attacker, not two, and the pattern of injuries suggested that the attacker knew the layout of the house, knew where each family member slept, and moved methodically from room to room. Marley had the most defensive wounds. Experts believed she had seen the attacker coming and tried to fight him off. Her mother and brother had minor defensive wounds, which suggested they may have been asleep or barely awake when they were struck. And Martin, the father, had deep wounds on his back. The kind of wounds you get when you're trying to shield someone else with your own body. He had died trying to protect his son Rudy, trying to stop his other son, Henri, from swinging that axe one more time. As the weeks went on, more details emerged. Henri was placed with an uncle while Marley was sent to live with another family member. Police wanted them separated. They had their suspicions, and they didn't want Henri anywhere near the only surviving witness, even if that witness had no memory of what happened. The media began digging into Henri's background. His tic addiction became public knowledge. So did the fact that his parents had cut him off financially after sending him to rehab. Newspapers even tracked down his dealer, who confirmed that Henri had been a regular customer. Then there was the question of motive. The Van Breda estate was worth approximately $17 million. If Martin, Teresa, and Rudy were dead, and Marley was incapacitated, who would inherit that fortune? The answer was obvious. But even without the inheritance, there was another possible motive: resentment. Henri's parents had taken away his money. They had tried to control his life. And maybe, on that night, something inside him snapped. Still, it would be over a year and a half before Henri was arrested. On June 13, 2016, he was finally taken into custody and charged with 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. Bail was set at 100,000 rand, about $6,700 US. Henri paid it. He was released under the condition that he report to his local police station regularly and not leave the Western Cape province. In September of that same year, Henri and his girlfriend, Danielle van Rensburg, were arrested for possession of marijuana. It was a minor charge, but it added to the growing perception that Henri was not the grieving son he claimed to be. The trial finally began in April 2017. Henri pleaded not guilty to all 5 charges. His defense team offered a detailed explanation of what he claimed had happened that night. According to Henri, he and his family had watched Star Wars and enjoyed a lovely dinner together. Then, in the early morning hours, while he was in the bathroom, he heard banging noises. An intruder, maybe 2, broke into the house. Henri's father tried to stop them. Henri fought back. He got hurt. He passed out. When he woke up, everyone was injured or dead. He was confused, disoriented, and eventually called for help. It was a story that might have been believable, if not for the mountain of evidence that said otherwise. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They walked the jury through every piece of evidence, every contradiction, every impossible detail in Henri's story. And slowly, the picture became clear. First, there was the question of security. Expert after expert testified that the de Zalze Golf Estate was virtually impenetrable. The estate had motion detectors, an alarm system, 24-hour guard patrols, access-controlled gates, and an electric fence. One security expert told the court that not even Houdini himself could have broken into the Van Breda home without being detected. Yet Henri claimed that 1 or possibly 2 intruders had done exactly that. They had bypassed every layer of security, entered the home without triggering a single alarm, murdered 3 people, nearly killed a 4th, and then disappeared into the night without taking a single thing. No cash, no jewelry, no electronics, nothing. The prosecution asked the obvious question: why would someone break into a multi-million-dollar home ignore all the valuables, and commit mass murder for no reason? Henri had no answer. Then there was the forensic evidence. Blood spatter analysts testified that the pattern of blood throughout the house was consistent with a single attacker moving from room to room. The force of the blows was uniform, suggesting one person had wielded the axe the entire time. And the angle of the wounds on Marlie suggested she had been awake and trying to defend herself. She had seen the attacker's face. The prosecution also pointed out that Henri's injuries were suspiciously minor compared to the carnage inflicted on his family. If he had really wrestled with an axe-wielding intruder, why were his cuts so shallow? Why were they located in places that would cause minimal damage? Forensic experts testified that the wounds appeared to be self-inflicted, deliberate attempts to make it look like he had been attacked too. And then there was the 3-hour delay. The prosecution argued that Henri had waited for his family to bleed to death. He thought Marlie was dead too. He staged the scene, inflicted minor injuries on himself, and then called for help, only after he was sure there would be no witnesses left to contradict his story.
As far as you can remember and what you observed that night, in what manner did the attacker execute the attack on your brother Rudy? Can you please demonstrate?
As far as I could see, when the lights switched on, the attacker was facing. The attacker was standing in between our two beds, with Rudy lying on his bed here, in the situation with the attacker's facing this way. I'm behind him, and he was swinging the axe down.
What he had been doing, apparently, was smoking. Henri admitted during testimony that after the attack, he had gone outside and smoked a cigarette to calm his nerves, while his family lay dying inside. On May 21, 2018, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. Henri van Breda was found guilty on all counts: 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of obstruction of justice.
After considering all the evidence, the result is inescapable. As a family man, it's difficult for me to say so. It is the only possible inference. In the premises, count 1, the murder of Henri van Breda, the accused is found guilty. Count 2, the murder of Martin van Breda, the accused is found guilty. Count 3, the murder of Teresa van Breda, the accused is found guilty. Count 4, the attempted murder of Henri van Breda, the accused is found guilty. Count 5, defeating or obstructing the administration of justice, the accused is found guilty. That is the unanimous decision of this court.
Henri van Breda was sentenced to 3 life terms in prison for the murders of his mother, father, and brother. He received an additional 15 years for the attempted murder of his sister, Marlie, and 12 months for obstruction of justice. In June 2018, Henri's legal team filed an appeal. It was dismissed. They filed again. Dismissed. They filed a 3rd time. Dismissed. Henri van Breda remains in prison today, still maintaining his innocence. Marlie van Breda survived that night, but the cost was unimaginable. The injuries she sustained left her with retrograde amnesia. She has no memory of the attack, no memory of her brother standing over her with an axe, no memory of the final moments she spent with her parents and her older brother, Rudy. She now lives with extended family, her identity protected for her own safety. She has had to rebuild her life from scratch, without the family she lost, and without the memories that might have given her closure. But even with all of that evidence, the forensics, the timeline, the contradictions, the guilty verdict, there were still people who believed Henri van Breda was innocent. And we're not just talking about a handful of conspiracy theorists on the internet. We're talking about people who knew him personally, people who had spent time with him, people who looked him in the eye and simply could not reconcile the young man they knew with the monster the prosecution had described. His girlfriend, Danielle van Rensburg, stood by him throughout the entire ordeal, even after he was convicted, even after the judge delivered 3 life sentences. She visited him in prison. She spoke out publicly, insisting that the justice system had made a terrible mistake. To her, Henri was not a killer. He was a victim of circumstance, a young man caught in a nightmare he didn't create. Then there was the social worker who had counseled Henri before the trial. She appeared in interviews, visibly conflicted, struggling to understand how the person she had worked with could have committed such brutal acts.
For me, it was really difficult to really bring forward in a way any reasons that would say, well, this is possibly what the court could consider in terms of what drove and what motivated his behavior at that point in time. As much as he has been found guilty, that as a professional person, for me, it's very difficult to actually really grasp that he was the one that has done that.
Her words weren't a defense of his actions. They were an admission of doubt, a confession that even after all the evidence, even after the verdict, something about the case didn't sit right with her, and she wasn't alone. A small but vocal group of Henri's supporters, friends, extended family members, even some legal analysts, continued to question whether the investigation had been thorough enough, whether the police had looked hard enough at other possibilities, whether a rush to judgment had sealed Henri's fate before all the facts were in. Some pointed to the lack of a clear motive. Yes, there was speculation about money, about resentment over his parents cutting off his allowance. But Henri never confessed. He never explained. And without a confession, without a smoking gun piece of evidence that definitively placed the axe in his hand at the moment of the killings, his supporters clung to the possibility, however slim, that someone else had been responsible. Others focused on the 3-hour delay in calling for help, arguing that it could be explained by shock, by trauma, by the confusion of someone who had just witnessed unimaginable horror. They pointed to cases where victims of violence had behaved in ways that seemed illogical or suspicious, only to later be vindicated. They asked, what if Henri really had blacked out? What if his memory of that night was fragmented, incomplete? What if he truly didn't know what had happened until it was too late? Sadly, cases where sons turn on their own families aren't unique to the Van Breda murders. What do you think about this case? Could this tragedy have been prevented if someone had reported the abuse? Should Nick Browning ever be released? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime deep dives every week.